This is the iconic Devastator in 2009's Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. And this is, well,
I am directly below enemy scrotum.
It's also the moment when these movies went off the rails for good. The first question on most people's minds when they saw this in theaters was, why? The easy response is Michael Bay, and while that's largely true, the lead up to this moment was more complex than that answer makes it sound. And at the end of the day, it all sparked the downfall of the entire series. When Michael Bay's first Transformers movie hit theaters, it was met with mixed reactions, to say the least. Light on plot and heavy on spectacle, the 2007 project was more of a demo reel for industrial light and magic special effects than anything resembling a real film. Still, that was enough for many fans. Seeing the beloved 80s toy line and animated series characters brought to life in stunning realistic CGI was a novelty worth $710 million at the box office. There were a few good jokes.
Satan's Camaro in my yard. It's stalking me.
Some incredible animation and a whole lot of noise, literally and visually. And as Bay plowed his way through the franchise for the next decade, he would only increase the volume. It got to a point where the ILM team coined a term for Bay's proclivity toward incessant action, explosions, and displays of military might. They dubbed the director's signature mess Bayos, and you can decide for yourself whether that's a term of endearment or not. By the end of Bay's stint as director, Transformers was no longer a novelty, but a joke. 2017's The Last Night was panned by critics and audiences alike, although it still made an astounding $605 million in theaters. For a moment, it seemed like Bay had done irreparable damage to a franchise loved by millions. It took the likes of Travis Knight's Bumblebee in 2018 and Josh Cooley's Transformers 1 in 2024 to sweeten the once sour reputation of Transformers movies. So how exactly did we let it get that bad in the first place? When did Michael Bay switch over to the side of the Decepticons and seemingly make it his mission to destroy the Autobots and the entire Transformers franchise? Like we said at the beginning, it can all be traced back to Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. While the movie made even more money than its predecessor, boasting $836 million worldwide, it wasn't as warmly received as the first had been. Transformers fans and critics were largely in agreement that Revenge of the Fallen wasn't good. The plot was paper thin, most of the cast seemed like they didn't want to be there, and the Bayos was out of control. But the worst offender in the movie came in the form of a single line, specifically one said by John Turturro's Agent Simmons while the team's in Egypt looking for their latest MacGuffin.
I am directly below enemy scrotum.
As with the first Transformers movie, Revenge of the Fallen isn't all bad. The team over at ILM worked their tails off to ensure that our titular alien robots were in fighting shape on screen. Devastator was and still remains their biggest project for the franchise. They even joked in the film's behind-the-scenes featurette that creating Devastator literally exploded their PCs, but the joke isn't that far from the truth.
They said that the motherboard was dead, the hard drive had failed, and the memory was fried. So, everybody was a little bit afraid of Devastator at that point because he would devastate your machine.
It took 72 hours per frame to render the colossal bot, and every single one of the 80,000 moving parts was animated with care. For reference, Optimus Prime contains only 10,000 moving parts, so Devastator was significantly more complex. And yet, after all that work, 2 of those parts overshadowed the rest. It's unfortunate, but not at all surprising, that the incredible transformation sequence for the Decepticon Combiner has left less of an impact on audiences than a throwaway joke. The entire Devastator sequence at the pyramid is just one in a long line of classic Michael Bay style set pieces, so it isn't given any real dramatic weight. When you're sitting through 2.5 hours of ILM flexing its computer power, of course, the most memorable bits of the movie are gonna be Devastator's bits. Now, the Transformers series was no stranger to lewd and crass humor before this.
So listen, I was wondering if I could ride you home. Give you a ride home.
Bay knew the audience he was trying to court, and while you can say plenty of uncharitable things about the director, he knows how to make movies for a certain demographic of people. In the first Transformers, Bumblebee lubricates Seymour Simmons, because the guy just can't catch a break, apparently. While you can't make many excuses for that Bumblebee moment, at least it wasn't shoved into the middle of a supposedly important action scene, and it didn't make a joke out of an otherwise cool and well-constructed character design. So when all of Bay's directorial instincts should have told him not to include the enemy's scrotum joke, why did it make it into the final cut of the movie? Well, first of all, let's be honest with ourselves, this moment is exactly in line with Bay's directorial instincts. Still, movies are a collaborative art form. Can the blame really be laid solely at his feet? Well, kind of. The biggest outside influence on the state of Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen was the writer's strike. In late October of 2007, Bay and the movie's 3 writers, Aaron Kruger, Roberto Orci, and Alex Kurtzman, knew the strike was impending. The problem was that Revenge of the Fallen already had a release date booked for June 2009. With no idea how long the strike was going to last, Bay had his 3 writers crank out a 20-page outline in 2 weeks, just before the strike officially began on November 5th, 2007. Bay padded the outline himself until he had around 60 pages of material to work with for pre-production. And in the meantime, all he could do was wait for the strike to be over. That day finally came on February 12th, 2008, 4 months later. 2 months after that, principal photography was set to begin on a movie that didn't have a script, so Bay went from director to dictator. He booked a hotel room for Kruger, Orci, and Kurtzman and had them work around the clock for 6 weeks while periodically dropping in for surprise inspections to make sure they were actually there getting the work done. He put up concept art and location photos all around the room and effectively held them hostage until the script was written. Whether the infamous Devastator joke was a product of the writer's weeks-long crunch period or Bay's additional padding, we'll never know for sure, but it's safe to say the strike didn't help the script turn out very coherent, let alone funny. Forcing 3 people to produce an entire movie script from a hotel room over a period of less than 2 months isn't exactly an ideal work environment. We can't really bash them for going for the low-hanging fruit, but that's not actually the end of the story. To get the full context of how we ended up here, we've got to go back to the early 2000s. Before Bay was slated to direct, he never wanted to make a Transformers movie in the first place.
I'm not doing that movie.
He had to be convinced by Steven Spielberg, of all people, to take a big, pendulous swing at turning the Hasbro toy line into a massive blockbuster. Presumably the money and the big CGI playground he found himself with were incentive enough to stick around, and we all know how that went. By the time the 3rd movie rolled out into theaters, even Spielberg had enough. As Bay told Unilad back in 2022, Steven Spielberg said, "Just stop at 3. And I said I'd stop. The studio begged me to do a 4th, and then that made $1 billion too, and then I said I'm gonna stop here, and they begged me again. I should have stopped. They were fun to do." And that just about covers the how and why of Bay's Transformers movies. Since the first movie made so much money, Bay just kept hammering away at the franchise with no real plan. When the writer's strike wreaked havoc on his script for the second movie, he had even fewer guardrails in place to keep him on track. When the enemy's scrotum didn't prove to affect box office returns, he was allowed more freedom to do what he wanted. Unfortunately, he used that freedom to get away with the bare minimum, while assaulting audiences' senses with more and more useless Bayos. And that ultimately brought Bay's Transformers franchise to its knees. But hey, that's just what we think. Now we want to hear from you. Where do you think the Transformers movies went wrong? Or do you like them at all? Let us know in the comments, and while you're there, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Nerdstalgic for more videos just like this.